morning and welcome to your daily game face. I am Dr. Kim Lannon here with technically okay today, Lou.
I know we have music and everything.
I know, except I have a technical difficulty. My phone decided to do an update while I was driving, and it's still updating. Wow. So everything that I have for my notes for today is sitting behind.
So Apple does forced updates too?
Yeah, apparently.
Yeah.
My phone this morning wouldn't take pictures, it wouldn't do anything, and so apparently there's a new upgrade to everything.
Yeah.
And so as I was driving, so now it's just sitting in the queue, doing its thing. And I'm here with Rockstar today.
That's right.
Rocky the Rockstar is here. He had to make his round, so we're actually late.
I heard you downstairs.
That's because
I could tell you were in the building.
And it's soundproof too. Isn't that crazy?
Well, yeah.
Well, the doors weren't shut, but I came in and he knows how to. Without leash, he comes right in and goes to each person's office that he knows, like on cue.
Yep.
I have an eye twitch going on. Do you see that?
Yeah.
Do you actually see it?
Sorry, yeah.
Oh, wow.
I'm an observant individual.
You're an observant individual? Yeah, I have an eye twitch. Could be the fact that I've had a massive sinus headache for the past 3 days.
That could be it. Could be stressed.
You think? You think? No, I'm not stressed. What would there be stressed about?
How's your blood pressure, by the way? No, I'm serious. That's a blood pressure thing.
My blood pressure probably right now is sky high.
Yeah.
Well, and the fact that I'm like having an allergy / winter thing, it is so dry out. Like that's, I think, part of it. It's so dry out right now and it's icy. And I was just explaining to Lou that little Mr. Rockstar, the doggy, for people that are new listeners, he's a little Maltese. He's not liking the cold weather and the windy days and ice and refuses to pee anywhere or go to the bathroom in general. Hours over the weekend of the snowstorm and the ice storm of just looking at me going, nope, nope, nope. And so he had a surprise for me.
Well,
twice.
Yes.
But he did not ask to go out. He asked to not go out.
No, he asked you to come up with a solution for the
cold.
cold.
I did. I tried. Yeah. I gave him pee-pee pads. I gave him cat litter boxes. Nope, he used my office.
Yep.
He found my office. And now he's just,
I had a thought this morning.
You had a thought?
I had a thought this morning, my first 20 seconds in the car.
Oh, God.
Which was, it's a tribute to us New Englanders that we don't just kill people on an hourly basis at this point in the year.
I know, right?
Mid-February. It's so miserable.
It's so awful. And it's so dreary out. The sun's out today, but it looks like crap.
I had one of those trigger points yesterday where I lost it. And it was over Dunkin' Donuts.
I didn't even get to Dunkin' Donuts this morning. I was in a late rush with the child. It's very hard to have 6 cats, a dog, and a husband. I could put that.
I didn't expect that. Okay.
I could put it in the reverse order on that. So I had complaints last week.
About what?
About the failure on my part to update people on what I did the week before. Right. And remember when I finished the show and I said to you, I said, oh my God, I didn't tell people what I did because I forgot.
Yep.
Because it was so in my head, it was so far gone. And I had told the story so many times and so many people asked me. So I apologize for my failure of not updating and leaving people in psychological suspense, which probably now people are going to be like, oh, who cares?
This show's in a different timeline than the rest of our lives.
I know. And that could be why I have a headache because, the world's going to shit. Anyway, the psychology of the world. So I will update people who cared about it that didn't know. So what is it? 2 weeks now? It's been 2 weeks, right?
Just about, yeah.
I have to blow my nose. Hold on. Excuse me.
Go.
For my rudeness of my eye problem. So 2 weeks ago, well, it's 3 weeks ago now, because it was on my birthday that this happened. So I heard about it. Well, not heard about it. I got the invite, right? I was invited. So if people don't know, I have to give a little history.
This is important. You were invited.
Yes.
You didn't try to go to this event.
No, this was like a
come to this event.
Right. So, and then there were invites, but I mean, there were ways to go to it, but they were sold out. And so people that wanted to end up going with me couldn't get tickets because obviously it was sold out. But anyway, so by fluke, in my opinion, some people that listen to this show right?
Yep.
Right. And also know the background of me being in acting for years and doing performance and all these things. Anyway, so there's the most famous theater in the entire country, to my knowledge, is in Harvard, at actual Harvard University, the Hasty Pudding Theatricals. And that's the, the hall that is famous for this beautiful theater that's very small. It's like a little black box theater, but it's a normal, like, tiered theater, but only seats very few people. Anyway, so they do their theatrical shows, but every year they honor the man of the year and the female of the year for varieties of things, but it's usually from the performance field. And this year they had John Hamm for the
John Hamm was
the man of the year, and that was on Friday right after my birthday that they honored him and gave him the hasty pudding pot.
Yep.
And so that's like a famous thing they do. So what they do is they have this big parade during the day.
What did John Hamm do this year?
He did something, and I can't remember what it was. Top Gun. I know he was in Top Gun.
I know that he was in Landman, which was very good.
Yes, and he was very good in Top Gun. I can't remember because I didn't go. I wasn't invited to that.
Yeah,
and I didn't go to that. Anyway, so it was on my birthday. Oh, my phone is starting to say hello. So anyway, so then 4 or 5 days later, or whatever it was, maybe a week later, the Woman of the Year was being, and it's the 75th honoring of the Woman of the Year, and this year. It just happened to be Cynthia Erivo from Wicked.
Yeah, well, she's done something.
And she's done a lot of some things, right? Yeah. So anyway, so I had the honor and privilege of getting a shout out invite to, hey, so, and it was very cool because it was very few people. I mean, there were some people, and it wasn't just like one of those, go and, you just go and she's off it was
right.
It was hang out, meet and greet, champagne, like the whole 9 yards. And we had a lovely chat, and she came into the room because she got her hasty pudding pot. She did her wonderful last little bar of the song from Defying Gravity, right before the movie ends, before the second part starts, which we haven't seen yet. And then she had a good time with everybody, did her little press thing, and then came up, and then they did their theatrical production too. But we also then during intermission, I went up and she and I chatted, and I am so impressed with the fact that, have you ever seen her nails? Her nails are like a foot long. They're not, but and she very gently came up and talked to me and grabbed my hands, and the nails never touched. Like, she's so good at maneuvering these nails. Like, I get a little bit longer than this, and I'm like poking myself in the eye.
Yeah, right.
Right. But she was so lovely and so
what is she like? Because
gracious.
Her front, what she puts out is very, I don't want to say extreme is not the word I want to use, but
she was very
edgy.
She was not that night. And I mean, she'd been at the Grammys 2 nights before. And she had that look, and I was wondering, like, what you're talking about, I think is that look. And then that night she was wearing a little fedora sort of beret thing with this really cute little jacket, and not a lot of makeup. And she didn't have her nose ring in. She didn't have a lot of like any bling on. She was just, I think, Cynthia Erivo, and very casual and lovely, and it's just so down to earth. And it was a lovely time because there wasn't like a push thing. There was no line. It was just her mingling and just being a normal social person. And it was a great experience. And I'm just so excited and happy that I got that invite. And it was really cool.
Nice.
And it was, I mean, it's a, wow.
pretty good big event, especially here if you're a New England native.
Yeah, and if you didn't, because the hasty pudding thing, the event is like the whole day is an all day event for them down there. So I didn't go to the events prior. So they do like a luncheon, and they do a parade for her down in Harvard Square, and then they have like it's the whole day. And then I just went to the gala thing that night and the black tie affair. So I was in the building less than, I would say, 30 seconds, and a man who I ended up taking a videotape because I was like, that's the man that did this, spilled an entire glass, not a little bit, an entire glass of red wine down the back of my legs.
Oh, God.
And everybody was around. There was a lot of women there, obviously. So, right. And everyone was like, sir, you literally, and right. He didn't say he was sorry. He never acknowledged that he did it. It was like the intro to my night. I'm thinking, oh my God. And so I tell you this story because it has to do with Cynthia, is that because I was wearing for Christmas, I had gotten a pair of, as you know, I love my heels, my crazy stiletto heels. I was wearing a pair of Ariana Grande from Wicked shoes from her character Glinda. And they're lovely. And I've only worn them twice. And he spilled all down them. And yeah. And so when I was with Cynthia, I was talking to her about the story of the man spilling it because we were talking about him because he was over there because she was like, "What's on your shoes?" And then at the end of it, I said, "We signed my shoes." So she signed my shoes. So I have red wine and her signature on my shoes.
Nice.
She was laughing. She's like, "I'll sign your shoes."
Yeah.
It's very cute. So,
Yeah.
and then I made the drastic mistake of going home and thinking that if I put hairspray on them before I shellac them, that would not try to ruin them. And immediately it started to run them. I'm like, "Oh my God." So I had to, it was, I know, first world problems, but nonetheless. So I wanted to wear them again. Everyone's like, "You can't wear those. You have to put them in a shadow box." So now I have to get a new pair. So anyone want to go get me a new pair, 8.5s of the Ariana Grande Glinda shoes from Aldo, please do. They're now down to $95. They were $140. Thank you.
That's not bad for shoes.
Now I can't wear them.
Yeah.
So anyway, it was I can't even, people have asked me what an experience. And, it's one of those once in a lifetime kind of like moments. Not that I've met, me, I'm not starstruck. Yeah. And so it wasn't a starstruck thing. It was just more like, oh, she was just so lovely and so down to earth and pleasant and just chatty and not about herself.
A unique event.
It was just so great. It was just, it was, I can't even, you had to be there.
Yep.
I can't even describe it. So I did have friends asking me if I would FaceTime them from it and put her on. I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. No, that would be bad. So, but it was funny. It was like, just FaceTime and say, no, we're not doing that. Yeah. So I did. If you are a follower of my regular Facebook page, I put up tons of pictures of the two of us together and us in our little chat because people were capturing us chatting and holding hands and having a lovely chat. So she's a little petite thing too. Yeah. She's a very tiny person. So, and all that voice comes out, and it's when she was standing on stage, like from me to you, right? Because I get to sit next to her too. That was really cool too.
She's had a good couple of years.
She's been in so many good things, and she's a great representative for a lot of diversity, equity, and inclusion in a time that there's a lot of bullshit around that. So she's a wonderful spokesperson, and I love her for that. So yay, Cynthia. And she is lovely. So I can't say enough good things about her. So that was what I did. Nice. So I know that a lot of people already had found out, but then in between, people were like, "I can't believe you didn't tell us what you did." So I was like, "Oh God, sorry about that." So my phone has finally updated, and today I had to text Lou last night. Oh, I called you endlessly for like 20 minutes calling you, and I was like, "What?"
Call me twice.
Endlessly. See, endlessly. But I had to call you because I was very confused, not really, about what did I promise everyone I would talk about this week, and I could not find it on our podcast, and I also didn't have the patience and time to go back through from last week. And you finally texted me and said, "What do you want?"
It's not what I said at all.
Kinda. And I said, "I need for you to tell me."
You could have inferred it, but
yeah, I know exactly what you were saying in your commentary, and you were saying, and you replied with exactly what it was, and I couldn't believe you remembered like that fast. I was like, "What am I talking about?" I knew it was a third part in what we were talking about relationships and toxicity and narcissistic, grandiose people in life.
Well, I panicked when you first asked because I didn't think I was going to remember, but then it came to me.
Oh, well, it came to you, but it didn't come to me. But as soon as you typed it, I was like, wow, that's right. So if everyone has been listening to the first two parts of this show, the third part of this show, which could turn into a fourth part, is about the I just lost it. Oh my God. Cause
your role.
I got it.
Okay.
It's just because I'm having a moment, There's a lot of things going on.
I understand.
It's your role. Yes, I'm sure. We're not going to talk about it.
Yeah.
Your role in the toxic part of the relationship, or what you do to participate in it, and and identifying those things and so on. So
how you feed it.
Well, how you feed it, but there's other parts of it too, not just, how it's feeding it, but also sometimes you're not feeding it, you're just participating it willingly and sometimes unwillingly, and you don't even know it. So being able to know what you're doing to it. And sometimes it's hard to break out of the toxic muck, right? Because, especially when you're in a long, like many year dynamic, like talking about family relationships. It's so hard. I think that's probably one of the first jump off points is to talk about how when people get so stuck in family relationship dynamics and they feel so compelled and they become complicit to the dynamic. And that's part of participating, is the complicity of being in it and not feeling like you have an agency to change anything. So you're part in it right off the top. And the most obvious thing is you keep participating in the same way you've always participated, because you don't do anything different because of guilt, shame, fear of retaliation, worry about abandonment, rejection, like all these things come into it. So, you may not want to be participating, but you do, because it keeps the homeostasis and the balance of the craziness going, because at least that, it's familiar, what the outcome is going to be when that happens.
And by participating, can we substitute rewarding the behavior?
I think it can be just participating, yes, we rewarding it and also enabling it. Like there's a level, I guess, of continuum of how you're, being toxic in the relationship. And toxic doesn't mean, like, again, it's the continuum, right? There's a continuum of, like, the gray areas, and then there's like the extremes. And it's not always about now my phone is trying to do a device protection update. Okay. Oh my God.
Oh boy.
So there's the continuum. And I think when you change the word around, it's really just that it's on the continuum, like participation. What kind of participation are you doing? And are you aware of it? And so, because many times people will say, I have nothing to do with this. Yeah. And in, like, when you're talking about some relationships, it's not a 50-50, how some coaches, life coaches and relationship coaches will say, well, it's 50-50, you bring 50%, or, no. You could be 10% and the other person could be 90, or vice versa. It's really a matter of, like, knowing what your part in it is. And I'm distracted because it keeps popping up with hello.
This also works with people who also find themselves in the same situation all the time. Always dating the same person. I have a bunch of friends that exhibit this behavior. Why am I a target for this?
Right.
You're participating in it. And it's not all your fault, but you have to recognize what your role is.
Well, you have to recognize what your piece in it is. It. So toxic relationships, obviously can come in a variety of forms, right? In terms of, like, what they look like and how they behave and so on and so forth. But I think one of the things, if we're talking about, like, even if you're talking about family relationships that lead into your own personal, like, intimate, love relationships and all those things, you learn it as a child, to participate and enable it. And what you do is that, your participation is that you could be perpetuating a position of not being able to be given love and affection, because you're so guarded and you have a force field around you that is so defensive and walled up, that contributes to someone on the other side giving back, not the best response. That's not as common as it would be if, as the other side of someone giving the participation of, they don't give affection. If you're a person that's in a relationship and you've decided, I'm not giving this person affection, I'm going to withhold that, I'm going to make things conditional, that is, do you recognize that you're doing that? That's one of the biggest pieces that I see across the board when people have relational issues, is that someone's doing that. They recognize that they do it, but they don't change it because they feel they have a justification for doing it to the person. Like, I'm withholding that because it's giving, they don't realize maybe that it's giving them a sense of control and power in the relationship, but they're doing it to get that from them. Yep. They're doing it to do that. And so recognizing that, it's very difficult to recognize if you're doing that, because a lot of times people don't want to admit, because it makes you look like a jerk.
Yeah.
It makes you look like a not so nice person, especially when it's, intentional, and that means malicious at times. And I come from that space of talking about that, because I've seen this for almost 30 years, watching people go through these relationship cycles. And
that leads you to rationalize it.
And, well, you justify it, you make excuses for it, you rationalize it, you become tolerant. I think I said it last week, you become really resilient in childhood to a lot of, if you tolerate a lot of traumatic emotional abuse or physical abuse or whatever it is, or just put downs or not so nice things coming up through your life, you're going to be more likely to tolerate bad behavior for a longer period of time later in life in other things. Friendships. I see people struggle in friendships all the time, especially since the pandemic. I see people that their relationships have sort of fallen apart. And, I asked them, well, what did you do to participate in that? Well, they become isolative, and they also didn't connect in because, one, it was harder to, but they also felt like they didn't feel valued, and therefore they didn't value the relationship. So they didn't put a lot of effort in, but they expected the effort back.
Yeah.
So that's very one-sided. So it has that entitlement piece. So, right off the top, are you entitled? Have you thought about coming to the table and feeling like I deserve this and I'm owed this? Everybody deserves love. Everyone deserves unconditional love. Everyone deserves affection. That's great. But are you perpetuating this thing like I deserve it and I don't have to give it? Right.
Yep.
And are you on the opposite side, withholding it for a power play? Right. You have to know that. And I think the first step is awareness. Yes. But then people don't go a lot past the awareness, because then it's the work of like having to really deal with, oh my God, that's really painful to look at, that if I'm hurting someone or if I'm doing something that's passive aggressive, one of the biggest things that people participate in is being passive aggressive in toxic relationships. They get either they're outwardly like that just because that's who they are, or they become defensive to be that way in response to the relationship. So it's which side are you on?
Yep.
And how much of a level are you doing that in response to that other person? So you have the withholding of affection and love, or making it conditional, and then having that passive aggressive piece that's very clear. And that's a very common tactic in families, relationships, friendships, jobs. It's that passive aggressive continuum that goes to gaslighting, which I've talked about. And I had a student last week in my class ask me, I was talking about codependency because I'm teaching interpersonal dynamics, and I was talking about codependency and how it begins and how it starts to flourish throughout life and goes, and how passive aggressiveness turns into gaslighting. And then as an adult, if you don't have the gaslighter who was there originally, you will find other people who will gaslight you. And in lieu of that, you will gaslight yourself. So what are you doing? You participate in relationships by sabotaging yourself.
Yeah.
You can get into really toxic places because you sabotage it, because you become a projector of what you expect. You're transferring over, you're counter transferring to the other people that are new in your life, the things that happened to you in the past, subconsciously or consciously. Most of the time consciously, but people do it out of subconscious. Like it's just so automatic that they just project it out. Like, I'm going to be reactive and defensive to everything. I know people, and I know a couple of particular people in just my personal life. And it bodes out also in the professional world that they were raised in really harsh environments, like very neglected emotionally. They would report that they weren't, that they were loved. And then you ask, how would you know? Well, because they were my parent.
Yeah.
Right. Not specific. Right. But then they would give you a whole slew of really bad things that happened to them at the hands or the mouth of that parent, like verbally. Right.
Yep.
And then they come to now in their life and they're like very tolerant and acceptant of that. They have now become very similar to that person, and they've taken on that persona because it turned into that, and they don't own any of that and take responsibility for it because they don't see it.
Yep.
Because it becomes so overlapped. And so that's what I was saying about in my class is like the gaslighting, and this one student was like, is that really a thing? And gaslighting is really a thing. Yeah. And and I have talked about it in the past shows, but gaslighting has been around for years. We use it more now in terms, but it's just a slew of techniques that people use to maneuver people to get what they want and their needs, to actually take control and power in the relationship, whether it's to shut someone up in a moment or to passively accept, like, okay, just agree to agree. Those are all things. And if you don't, I was just thinking about someone that specifically does those things and then says in the moment of doing them, no, I don't do that, while they're doing it.
Yeah.
Right. And that is like, how do you get someone to see that? It's very hard to get someone to see what they're doing when they don't want to see it.
Right.
And that's one of the questions that I was thinking about when we talked about it last week. And then he had to remind me last night. I was like, oh yeah, it's people don't want to see what they don't want to see. And so therefore it's much easier to get into a fight with someone and verbally spar and get really aggressive or passive aggressive to do more damage and to perpetuate the cycle more because they just check out of like the ownership of it, or they check into it by just being like, oh, I'm sorry I do that, but I'm sorry, but you did this to make me upset, or you don't stop and I need you to stop.
Well,
but they
that's
don't
the most
say
prominent gaslighting, right? It's turning it around. You express a concern and they turn it around on you.
Exactly. So that's it's the Darbo thing that I was talking about, right? It's that whole deny. I deny that I've done that. Now I'm going to attack you. Now that makes it a reverse of the victim, right? And now the person is the victim and you've become the perpetrator and you were the one being hurt initially. And so, how do you, again, that it keeps coming back to not the participant in terms of like that way. It's more about the person who is doing it. And, the focus is often on that person, but it's like, well, what are you doing? It's about, don't allow it. Don't tolerate it. You have to ask yourself, not why are you doing this to me? Here's my participation point, right? It's more about, why am I allowing you to do this to me? Asking yourself, not asking, if you're damaging me, Lou, and you're toxic with me, I'm not going to sit there and be like, why are you doing that to me? I might say, why are you talking to me like that? That's different. But in my head, I'm going to say, why am I allowing the person to do this? Why is that a thing? And that's how you start taking responsibility for your participation in it. Because if you continue to allow people to do X, Y, or Z without putting a boundary down for yourself of what you will tolerate and accept, then you're not living in the year of you, because you're living in their world. You're living under their rule and their control and their power and their wants, their needs, and everything's superseding you. Right. And that's not a balanced, homeostatic relationship.
It's also rewarding the behavior and training them how to treat you.
Well, exactly. I know you love that, right?
I do it because it's a great principle to understand.
And I would just say that there's a person who's now reaping huge money benefits off of my commentary of like that from years of me saying that. Now she's saying, I have to just say that because she is. But I think that that's the thing, is people don't realize how much they're rewarding the behavior if they don't set a boundary. Now, boundary setting is exceptionally hard. And so that's how to change the behavior of you participating in something. And
because that's the thing about it. Boundary setting is hard because toxic people are really good at what they do.
Yes.
They're really, really good at it. They're very practiced. They're very accomplished. They're really good at it.
And they're very, they double and triple down on it for themselves, to protect themselves, because it's a protector for themselves. It's, there's sometimes I would say that full on, it's just a malicious, like intentional, awful thing that people do to someone. Right. But it's more of a, that's the end result in many cases anyway, but it's still about the person protecting themselves. So they use as much coping strategy, and I'm being kind here. They're using coping strategies to get the other person to stop, because it's too painful for them to hear facts, the truth, a feedback, a criticism, and also people personalize. They don't hear for what you've said. They listen they just listen for their next reaction, not response. So there's so many pieces in there. Like, I'm sure you could like piece together how many things and edges can you come from to actually look at your own behavior, to take responsibility for like all these things. You have to really be able to say, where am I in this and what am I doing to perpetuate that? Am I engaging? A lot of times I have a couple clients that I've seen over the past week that we've talked about in class too, is like, how much do you engage and how upset do you get? And it's very hard not to get upset, especially when you're being gaslit. It's so hard to take that step back and just be like, all the perfect things I could give you in the world to say are even hard. I certainly have gaslighters in my life, and I have a hard time even myself. And I've been practicing it for years. Sometimes I do really fabulous for months, weeks, years on end. And sometimes no, because you can't escape the accumulation effect that, despite the fact that you're doing the boundary setting and the sets of the limits and the commentaries are noted and being really healthy, sometimes you'll lose it.
it's more difficult the deeper you are in this relationship because they're used to the patterns. And when you try to stand up and create boundaries, they will fight them. A lot of times,
well, because you're cutting off their supply,
right?
So
and a lot of times when they're new to a relationship and they get this resistance, they just stay away from the person,
right?
And that's kind of your role, is that the part you play is that you've accepted this for a while.
Well, and so and that's the training you to treat them, training them to treat you a certain way, because and when you said that, it made me think of like the silent treatment. When you give someone the silent treatment, that's a huge participation point. Like you think that, oh, I won't make it any worse, I'll just be silent. If you're going silent in a relationship or a family dynamic or anything like that, or even look at in business, like talking, all you're doing is lighting it up.
Yeah.
You're not making it any better. I have people that will tell me like, oh, I went for a walk for 4 hours. That is not okay. I went for a drive for, the day and left the person hanging, with the emotional baggage of this. That is not okay. That is not what we do. Right. And not a lot of people do that, but the people that I see that are really more in the toxicity and like at the extreme, they'll do stuff like that. Think with the reasoning, excuse, justification that when I do that, it will make it better because it won't light it up more. No, that's just you escaping to avoid having to deal with the actual issue, to never get resolve out of it. And so people, like to your point, that are super toxic, have a really hard time looking at the fact that they're like every step that they're taking is just adding on another layer of resentment, another layer of toxicity, another layer of hurt, another layer of disappointment. And it's just, because they won't look at it. And so although the topic is like, how do you take responsibility and what's your part in it? It's much easier for the person who's on the other side, who's taking part in it, to look at themselves rather than the more toxic, because both people can be toxic because they're participating, but there's going to be usually one person in all of these relationships that's less toxic and able to see it. That's usually the person that lands in my office.
Yeah.
Right. It's not the person that's the most,
because they're willing to look
behind the curtain. They're willing to like say, okay, what do I need to do? And then when yesterday I had a person who was doing a family sort of boundary, and she has low self-esteem and she really struggles with it. And so I'm trying to teach her some self-agency to get little bits at a time by just incrementally saying things to her in-laws and to other people in the extended family when they overstep their bounds with her kids, and take over sort of the parenting role. And she has such a hard time because she wants to be loved and liked and not abandoned and rejected. And she's willing to look at all of that, and she's taking little inches here and there, but it's still it keeps coming back. And we've been working on this for a decade. It keeps coming back to, but what if they don't like me?
Yeah.
And I said, who cares? And she's like, yeah, but I have to. No, you don't have to do anything. And that's, when you're participating, and that's what we were talking about yesterday, you're participating by enabling the situation because your feelings of being needed to be needed and wanted in that codependency loop, right? I need you to need me to need you.
Yep.
And I don't want you to not love me. And I don't want you to like me. And I said to her yesterday, I said, you're conditionally being loved if you think that that's how it's, you're not being self agency focused. You're not doing things to be helpful to your own parenting because you're more concerned about them being upset with you than taking the authority figure for your kids from them. And in the moment, she gets it. She owns it. She knows exactly the patterns. We identified 3 or 4 things she was doing, right? She's very people pleasing. She's a yes person. Like those things get you into those modes of how you're participating. That teaches them how to treat you in a poor way, because then they perpetuate the narrative you have in your head of the low self-esteem.
Yeah, because here's what happens. You have a particular need. Mine often is conflict adversity. I hate conflict.
I know.
So
it's amazing that you hate conflict because you love talking about it.
Well, because that's part of the awareness thing, trying to deal with it a little bit. Mm-hmm. But toxic people understand that and will give that to you and control you with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that.
And again, it's not necessarily.
The colors of
my thing.
It's not necessarily deliberate or knowingly, but they're just skilled at what they do.
Well, I think that they're skilled at what they do, and I'd say that some people do it deliberately and
Sure.
knowingly. So
Yeah.
I think it's a combo pack, and it depends on the person. And I think that would also go to the level of the narcissism in the person, the level of hurt that the person has to the reality manager in their body, like their ego, their how damaged are they, and how much protection do they have to give themselves to like really attack you back. So like knowing a person saying like, I promise you that I will never do that again. And then within like 30 seconds doing it again, like literally.
Yep.
And you pointing it out, like you just did it again, and them saying, no.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, you did.
They're marking the territory.
And because what they're doing is they're owning it, right? Because I try to teach you, okay, you own it, but taking responsibility is 4 parts. It's being aware, apologizing, whatever that looks like, right? The apology of sincerity with authenticity, and like, but with that comes this back part, and that's what people miss. And it's not everybody. It's very few people. It's those people with heavy boatloads of the narcissistic qualities. It's the repair piece. It's the I'm never going to do it again, and truly never doing it again, and being very transparent with the work that they're doing on that.
Yep.
But people don't do that.
Right.
That are in those places, because they think that once they've said, I'm aware of what I did, I'm really sorry about it, now you just need to let it go.
Yeah.
You're being oversensitive. You're repeating to me
Turned
over
it
and
back
over.
around on you.
You're repeating back to me over and over again that I'm doing this. And you're like, well, what is it that you're doing? You're being repetitive in your behavior. So therefore I'm repeating it back to you because I want to know if you get it. That's a participation point that if you keep participating in, instead of just being like, you're like, saying like, I'm done, you need to go away from me and I need to go away from you. That, it's like, because we're not getting past those 2 points. Just because you say you're sorry doesn't mean anything. And I have friends that do this. I have in terms of like telling their kids, and apologies without behavior change are nothing. They're empty. It's like saying the word "the" over and over again. It doesn't mean anything.
And apologies with a but are gaslighting.
Right. And apologies with but, and
I'm sorry I did that, but you.
I was just it's the but you, right? And it's, and I think I was making an example 2 shows ago that when I started this series of having a client that has a spouse that often will say, I'm sorry, but you do this, and that's why I do that. And she will now say, no, it's not an apology with that, but he refuses to hear that. Yeah. He, so we're trying to toggle with, okay, the healthy thing is to obviously stand up for yourself at least once and say, my experience is, right? Because it's hard to stay at that moment. Well, my experience is that that's what happened. So that's what my experience is. And he has a very wonderful knack of just going, no, that's not what happened. And in the face of evidence, either whether it's with people around or, whether it's caught on their, like, their outdoor cam, or it's like in earshot of it, he will still say no.
Yeah.
Even sometimes he'll say yes, but in most cases he'll just be like, no, that's not what was said. That's not what happened.
Ego trumping reason.
Ego trumping reason. And it's such a consistent pattern in the toxic definition of a relationship. And that's not a unique quality. That's just a thing, because it's a way to defend oneself of having to take ownership truly to have to make a change.
Yep.
And so going back
because that's characterizing your ego as less. You're flawed in some way.
Right. And so, because you're making, like, you're helping me get to like places where people like to say, oftentimes people will participate for themselves by saying, I'm not perfect. You'll hear a lot of times, and I hate to generalize this, but I do a lot of work with addiction. And I find that people in addiction or in trying to be in recovery, usually people that are in really good recovery will not do this anymore, but people who are in addiction or even addiction behaviors will do a lot of the, well, I did, but I'm not perfect. And it's like, now they're throwing it back on you as if you're saying like, that's the expectation. Yeah. Or they're putting you down by saying like, oh, well, you think you're perfect and I can't be like you. It's like, that's not on the table.
That character that I talked about in the last episode, that's line after line after line. It's like 2 times an episode. It's like, I'm sorry, I'm not perfect. That's essentially the speech they give this character.
Right. Exactly.
And it's so prominent. It's just, it's weird.
And is that character in addiction? Is that the one that we were talking about?
No.
Because that's an often used dialogue. Again, generalizing, because it's not just two, but I find it a lot with people who are not doing good recovery work because they don't take responsibility for themselves. They're much more externalized and putting it out there, and that's how they participate. And the people that are trying to, here's another example. I have a client that is a longtime client, and he is constantly trying to convince and show. He uses the word, I'm trying to show her that she's wrong. And I'm like, what is, and so my question to him last week was, we've been talking about this for years. And we still have the same pattern. And now he's finally, he said to me last week, he goes, I know you keep telling me that I got to stop trying to show her, but if she could only see it my way. I'm like, you're too much involved in the right fight instead of just being like, okay, I didn't say that. What I said was this, and that's all I'm saying. Right.
Yep.
It's very simple, but instead it's like the person has to prove their point, and he knows that he's doing it because he's trying to prove his point, because he knows that when he grew up, his father always told him that he was less than, failure, no good, he didn't have anything worthwhile to say, all these things. So he feels the need to have to show his prowess, his ego of how smart he is, how right he is, how, and she's just not having it.
It's funny. I had this conversation with someone who didn't get a bonus for a reason. Some paperwork was late and asking me to write a letter about it. And I remember getting into the conversation. I looked at him and I said, what do you want? Do you want to be right, or do you want the bonus?
Right. Exactly.
Because you can't have both.
Right. Exactly.
And it's like, yeah, I can have both. I guess, no.
So
the best way to get this is to apologize for what you did and ask for the bonus anyway.
Right.
You can't do it both ways.
And I think that that's one of the things is, and it goes back to the 4 parts of the responsibility taking of like how you figure out your participation point, is that like in the example of the man I just said, he's the bonus guy. He wants both. He wants the bonus, and he wants,
I wasn't wrong. I didn't do anything wrong.
Right. And can't you just see it my way? It's like, no, you have to be able to see, in his case, it's about, he does not have a really good track record of being able to see other perspectives at all. It's really difficult for him because he really believes, and he's really wed to being right, because I think growing up, he needed to be right in order to make any kind of headway with his dad. And so I think he's right a lot of the time, but when he's not, he's right anyway. So he doesn't concede the point.
But that's the fuel for a lot of this relationship, isn't it? The inability to see other people's perspectives.
Exactly. Yeah. And so there's another participating point, that if you are lacking empathy, and so there's a list of things in my notes that I still can't see, and I'm just going through them in my head. So you got the passive aggressive thing, you've got the withholding of love, but also lacking empathy. If you don't give empathy, and you're a really poor empathizer, which comes with narcissism, because you weren't shown empathy, so you don't learn it, right? Because it's a learned behavior and a learned emotional thing. It's not just something that you're born with. There's emotional intelligence that comes with you. You either are or you aren't, but then you can foster it.
But that's not forgiveness and acceptance. It's just empathy. It's just understanding that person's perspective,
right?
Where they're coming from.
And that's what empathy is. It's understanding the perspective, and so if I use that man as an example, he'll understand this. He'll understand. I put that in quotes, the air quotes. He'll understand it. He'll hear it, but he doesn't actually understand it. He doesn't incorporate it to hello, sir. He doesn't actually understand it
by was here.
He's right. I know he's right down here. Yep. He's holding onto my leg. He doesn't integrate it into I call it the seat of the soul space, where the core belief system is that makes you the best version of you, to be your better self, because it's sort of like a false empathy. It's like, I'm going to tell you that I understand, just to shut you up.
Yep.
I'm going to say all the right things.
It's a mechanism. It's not an understanding.
Right. It's transactional.
Yeah.
It's transactional. It's very transactional, just to get you off of the topic and move forward. But the problem with that is, here's what's going to happen. When that happens, you participate in it, and then the cycle starts again, because the love bombing happens, or the niceties are there for a couple of days, and then the cycle turns back around again.
The basic flaw is we think we're talking the same language with people. We think what we say lands the way we say it because it comes from our perspective, but people hear differently.
Right. And if you,
you have to start understanding that whoever you're dealing with has a different outlook than you do. Doesn't mean it's right or wrong. It means that to be effective, you have to understand where they're coming from.
Right. And if you have,
how many times have you seen somebody with their family finally say, "Oh, I get it now"?
Yes. Oh my gosh. Yes. And having such a much better sense of that. I had a client have that happen yesterday, have an aha moment of realizing I did a metaphor for them around a movie, and I won't go into it, but it made sense for them all of a sudden because they could see it in the character that I was talking about. And then all of a sudden they could relate it to themselves and like, oh, sometimes you have to really third party it to have, it's that self-observing thing. You can't see it until you step it way back or see it from someone else's. But a lot of people just, that's a thing to participate. Where are you perpetuating something? You're not looking from a self-observing place. You're looking from the external of like, it's your fault. You don't agree with me. You don't, I heard it this way and therefore that's the way it is.
Yeah.
And in lieu of having audio and video recording, it's very difficult to, have the right fight, that's what I call it, the right fight. It doesn't matter about who's right. It's a matter of like, what did you actually hear me say?
You and I grew up Irish.
Yes.
And there's an Irish dynamic.
Yes.
In the family.
Yes.
And sometimes you run into people who don't understand that dynamic.
Yes.
You can be rough with, even New England. I mean, people joke about it all the time.
Yes.
The way we just get on each other.
Mm-hmm.
And it's fun and it's affectionate.
Sort of.
Yeah.
It depends on the family.
Yeah. I mean, yeah. But I mean, just even interpersonal here in New England, just talking to people on the street.
Yes.
You just get on each other.
Right. Well, it's much more that ribbing. I think there's even a commercial out now with I think Matt Damon now, or there's a TikTok about it. Like he makes fun of like that exact thing. Like that we have a New Englanders just have much.
If you came from Iowa or something, you'd think we were at each other's throats all the time.
Yeah, that's what it was. The whole thing he talks about is like him and Bill Burr, that we always are in fight mode.
Yeah.
And I think to some extent, I mean, people on the outside would see that we're always in fight mode because, that, and I think it's very, talk about cultural biases there. I mean, you got some Irish families, and speaking of that, right, you get, when you put that in the mix and you have that with like an Italian family, it's my
pairing, yes.
Right. Right. And so, or if you have relationships, if you have a marriage, it's like an Irish person with an Italian raised person, you've got a very heavy, interesting,
in my whole family
dynamic, right? Because I sort of I knew that, so I brought it up that way, that you got a lot of right fighters in there and very staunch in where they sit in their belief systems, and so not listen. And that's why I want to talk about the empathy, not listening for what's being said, but listening to just respond or react.
Yeah.
And a lot of times in the toxic relationships, it's just all reaction. It's all emotional, and no matter how you don't get emotional and you respond and not react, you will still get people in that space, because once you start changing it to being responsive, people still get upset with you because it's like a boundary. All of a sudden, now you're not participating in the reaction and fight, because chaos and fighting keeps that person in their balance. Yeah. When you don't do that with them and you back out of it and say, well, that's not my experience. That's not how it just landed on me. So I can only tell you what mine is. They will fight you to get you to go like, well, no, well, that's not my experience. Like,
but that's what they're seeking.
They're seeking to engage you in the fight of nothing, just to fight. And they'll say they're not trying to do that. Right. They'll be like, no, I'm not trying to do that. I'm just trying to show you. I'm just trying to say, you're trying to show me what? You're trying to, and they'll be like, yeah, but you're trying to control it.
You're too sensitive.
You're too, well, that's a gaslighting technique, is you're too sensitive. But now I have found that people have gotten better at being more covert narcissists with the you're too sensitive thing, because it's too obvious. It's much more about that tactic of, that's not what I meant.
Yep.
That's not, I didn't do it on purpose. My intention was this. But that's not what you said. And that's not or that's not what you did. And so when you participate in a bad, unhealthy way, you're going to go into defending yourself. If you don't participate, you're going to say, that's not my experience. This is what happened. This is what I'm saying. And that's all I'm saying.
Yeah.
Problem is that person, if they want to fight, the fight's going to probably happen because they don't respect the boundary.
Right.
And they don't value the boundary. So they'll just keep going. And because they lack empathy, they don't step in and say, let me just understand it from your side, because a lot of times the vulnerability
Right.
of stepping into the other side in their mind thinks that they're conceding to your point, and now they've lost their ground of their own position, and that's not it. It's about
Some
you.
people would rather be right than right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Right. And that's, and it's that vicious cycle I talked about last week. It's just that perpetuating of and it's not even it's enabling it. It's not looking at your own patterns of your own family and like, are you repeating? Usually, yes, you are.
That's a stunner sometimes. You sit there and you start realizing that you just built your own family. You just rebuilt your own family.
Oh, family.
Yeah.
And that's what, I mean, that's very common.
Yeah.
Like that's probably,
but not everybody has that moment. It's a really interesting moment when you realize, wow, I just recreated my home life, my upbringing.
And right. And I think that and that's hard I have one client that I know that she recognizes it in the dynamic, but her partner does not recognize it and refuses to recognize it. And it's not, and she doesn't lob anything at them like, you're just like your father. You're just like, it's more like she recognizes that, oh my God, our family dynamics are playing out here together. And he just will not go there.
Again, you see the family and say, oh, I get it now. I get why you're the way you are now.
Exactly. Yeah. And it's amazing because once you have those moments and you walk into a room and you're like, oh,
yeah.
That explains it, right? Because you see it. And growing up, oftentimes in some of the relationships that I had, I would describe them to people, and they, people, until you see something, like you just are like, oh yeah, it must be hard, and but then when you see it, you go, oh, right, and it's like a moment. I remember a friend of mine in college. I would tell her stories about certain things, and this about one particular person, and forever and and she's like, oh really, that's, yeah, and you could just tell it's like it can't possibly ever be that bad. And you see people do this. And I had a voicemail from a person that I had been sharing, right? I said, you want to hear? And she's like, okay. She after that was like, oh, I totally get it now, because until you actually see it, hear it, or feel it, taste it, touch it, whatever, like, oh yeah. It's not quite the same, because it's that understanding of like, well, everybody has stuff. Everybody has.
And oftentimes you feel like you're hearing one side of the story.
Right. Yeah. And then all of a sudden you go, oh.
Yeah.
No. Because again, it's not always 50-50.
Right.
And so you have to know, like, where's your stuff? Because everybody participates.
Yep.
It's just a matter of like, where do you participate? How hard do you participate? And where can you back it out? And it won't be perfect, because it's hard to break those cycles, especially if you're looped in them. Right. And that is why people stay or go back to bad relationships. And that's also how if you don't work on it, how you stay in them. If you don't work on the boundary setting and not how you participate, you will end up staying in it in an unhealthy way. People ask me, do I have to leave a relationship that's unhealthy and toxic? You don't have to leave it, but you have to figure out how to navigate it better for yourself. And then find out if it's fulfilling to you, given that you're navigating, and does the person then respond to you in a different, healthier way? A lot of times that's what happens. When you change your response pattern and you change how you handle the situation, the other person will respond, and it will just change on its own, healthier. But again, going back, and I'm saying, but again, going back to the narcissistic, really heavily toxic person that you're in the relationship with, or family member you're with, they will not go with you. They do one of those three things, right? I've talked about. They either change with you, which is super rare, but it happens on occasion. They stay the same, much more likely, at least that's what you know, and it's tolerated, or they get worse.
They escalate.
Right. And that is more often than not that,
because in that relationship, you get more and more behind the curtain, which is more and more threatening to them, which requires escalating their response to
it. Because they feel that, the louder I scream, the less you see.
Yeah.
The more smoke and mirrors it's there, you can't blow it past. And some people are exceptionally good at that. But then you have people that get really stuck, people who have really low self-esteem. Like I know a couple right now that she has really, really bad self-esteem, and he verbally and emotionally just abuses the crap out of her, just left and right, and they break up and they have these terrible things. He says these awful things, and then she runs right back to him because he does the love bomb, gaslight, and this whole thing, and then she goes in denial mode, like those things never happened. They happened a long time ago. Or that didn't happen.
Caused that.
Very much. She's used that of like, I was part of like the reason why he was so upset. Like, this is why you're in this position. Whereas if you're not in that lower self-esteem bracket and you feel like I don't need to be needed and you don't need me, then you will not fall into that. You'll be able to set the boundary and just be like, you're me, not about you. And I can stay here with you. But if you treat me like that, I'm going to take a hiatus from you for,
But in that instance, the love bombing is exactly what she needs.
And that's what
that's her role. She needs that. So she'll take that and take the collateral with it.
So because the love bombing is so great, and that's why it's love bombing, because love bombing feels so good, because it's like it builds the hope back up that this person's going to be so awesome. And if you don't recognize that that's a pattern and you just keep going back, you're just training them how to treat you so they get better at it.
Exactly.
And that's how people, you see those extremes of, movies like Enough, with Halle Berry, and was the one with the one out, she's out on the ocean. I can't remember what the name it was, but they, the extreme versions of the movies of people being abused, they get stuck because that loop gets tighter and tighter and tighter, because the love bomb is so lovely. And then they forget about all the terrible, awful things, and unless they have like a memory like I do, and I don't forget anything.
And then that need becomes how you repeat this pattern, because you're looking for the love bombing, and the love bombing is a technique of people who are generally toxic. And
you have to go through in those, because it's not like a straight through line. You have to go through the cycle of the crap and the really bad stuff to get to the love bomb. So you'll fight the fight because that somewhere it's like gambling. It's coming. It's going to come, and it's going to come. And it's going to be great.
If I play this machine, a couple more spins.
Mm-hmm. And if I just stick it out, and if we just talk about it, and I set boundaries, and he'll be better, or she'll be better.
But when people ask why they always meet the same person, that's why. Because that person is fitting a need, and that's a personality quality aspect of somebody who has that type of toxicity.
Right. And so the question that I often get from people is, well, how do I not do that? How do I fix my picker, essentially? How do I pick someone different? And I say, usually I do like a whole strategy list of, okay, we have to go through, first of all, you have to take a break from, if it's dating, I say you have to take a break from dating. You got to kind of sit with yourself. You got to really think about what makes you happy. What do you need? What do you want? And then what is it that's commonality when you first meet people? Because people show you something. They show you their best side. They love bomb you right out of it. All relationships love bomb in the beginning. That's what's wonderful. So you don't see often, but I help people see, like, there's certain phrases, there's certain words, there's certain things you can ask. Now the trend, is that people date much later in life to be in relationships to then be married, not early. They date, but it's not as serious. So the questions that you ask when you go on a date are so much different than the questions you ask, when you're 20, right? So I have a lot of 30 somethings that are dating, and, they've never been married, and they want those things. I'm like, you have the right to look for those red flags right out of the gate. And by asking questions, don't play the game of, the silly love bombing stuff, because you don't want to, and you don't have time, and it's a waste of mental energy. It's just a waste of time. And it's hard for some people because they love the feeling of the yummy, the emotional yummy that comes from it, because it's filling up that cup of the narcissistic injury in the person that never got it, or they did get it, but they got it the same way, because they'll seek out a person who will give them conditional love. Hold, please. I'm getting a, come here. Oh, he just backed away. He went under the desk. They are so used to getting conditional love, and that's normal to them, that they'll seek out someone who will give them conditional love. And we pull, and people have a hard time understanding this concept. We pull subconsciously and unconsciously for what we are used to getting.
Exactly.
And people are like, what? I'm like, they're like, you say I'm doing it on purpose. I'm like, you're not doing it on purpose, but you are. You're pulling for someone.
The devil,
you're right, and they pull for you. So if you are pulling, codependency is a perfect example of this. If you're pulling for someone who is very similar to your dad, like who maybe put you down and told you weren't good enough and all these things. And, in your whole life, you've been working to make sure like you feel better about yourself. You never be with a man like that. The likelihood is you're going to be like blind to that when it's sitting right in front of you, because they're not going to act that way at the beginning. But there are signs in there that you can see, because there's going to be an arrogance. There's going to be a know-it-allness. It might be subtle. There's things about these things. And so it's very dependent on case by case basis, but you're going to see these things.
And your relationship takes on a parental dynamic.
Well, and that's the thing is then you become, and it happens either way, right? Or and it happens in, any kind of LGBTQ as well. People often ask me that in classes, like, does that matter if it's like straight versus a gay couple? No, it's just people pull for what they know, and people have those dynamics, whether you're two females, two males, it doesn't matter. You'll pull for what you know. And if you don't know what you don't know, then you're going to just keep pulling for it. And if you keep repeating, it's because you haven't learned, or haven't wanted to learn, or haven't recognized what it is that you pull for. And you got to know that. And that's hard work. That is really hard work. Now, by saying that doesn't mean it's like years of work. It's sitting down and really saying, I need to be vulnerable to really admit to myself, like what I have tolerated in my youth to train me to be this way, so that I seek out, that I'm a yes person. I never say no. That's why I'm big on like, no is a full sentence. Use it, and women notoriously, unfortunately, still amazes me that they don't say no. They don't say that. Everyone's like, oh, I don't want them to be upset with me. I'm like, who cares?
Let me ask you your role. Let me ask you this cold question. No, we're talking about your role in attracting toxic people.
Oh yeah.
If that's a repeated pattern for you. What are toxic people looking for? What are the qualities you have that they target?
Excellent question. They target nurturers.
Yep.
People who are compassionate, have empathy, have go out of their way for you, go an extra mile. They can see that right out of the gate, females and males. That's what they look for. They look for that because they themselves are so damaged, they need someone to take care of them. But on the surface, when they meet you, they will look like all the things they're looking for.
Yeah.
But in fact, they are deplete. They usually lack empathy, or are almost down to zero in the tank on that, right? Because it's really hard to get that. That's the narcissism. So damaged.
And on the other side of it, the empathetic people will be looking for someone who needs help. Because their self-worth comes from helping people.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. And so when you're in a field like I'm in, a lovely friend of mine told me yesterday that it was very hard to detach from the work that they do. And I said, clients are not your life. And in similar work and I'm very good at detaching. Like, I don't take home anything in my head. Like,
they are if you self-identify as your job.
Right. And so in this field, in psych and behavioral health, you don't take your clients home in your head, and you don't extra help besides like the standard level of care to give good treatment, unless of course you have to go beyond for some people that have like an organic disorder, as you know, I've had in my life, who try to soul suck you because they have the personality disorder, plus they have like a paranoid schizophrenia, and then they become obsessed with you as a clinician. That's a problem, right? But those are in far and few cases, but they do happen. And that's where you have to be so mindful of the thing that I was telling my friend yesterday, is like, your clients are never your life.
Right.
They are. And the clients are all lovely human beings. That has nothing to do with it. But in our field, they are out there, you are here, and that's it.
Yep.
That's
has to be though.
Right. And I think that it's similar in relationships. It's like, you are your own person and they are their own person. And if you can't be here and like, just like, it's a visual that I can't, if people aren't watching, but it's like, you can't be overly enmeshed and stuck together, because you'll bind into that. And if you feel sympathy, not empathy, and that's also what people look for. Like you asked about that. People look for not empathy. They'll look for, are you sympathetic? That means you'll join them in their misery. You'll participate with them in it because you're trying to help them. And they want that because they'd rather have you be sympathetic than empathetic, because then it's easier to control you.
Yep.
Right. And so you have to decide, where your line is on your empathy. And I can always understand where someone's coming from. That doesn't mean I'm ever going to feel it. I don't have to feel it. And I could feel it if I wanted to. Like if someone passes away, like I had a client pass away a couple weeks ago.
Sure.
I felt that because he'd been with me forever. He was an older gentleman that had been in the military and all these great, wonderful things. So I had an emotional connection in that way, but in a healthy way. It's like I knew where the boundary was. He knew where the boundary was. Like, of course, after 20 years,
Yep.
it's going to be there. But he was dying of cancer. I didn't have to like run to his saving bedside every
Right.
he has family. Like he just saw me
Right.
once a week. I had a relationship once a week for 20 something years. That's it. But people get so into this thing of like building up the narrative around things. And so I think that when you're, whether it's in the relationship I'm talking about with the friend who works in the field, about like it's hard for her not to, do extra work, stay the extra 5 hours, not 1 hour, but 5 hours at work to help all these clients. Like,
Yeah.
It's like, no,
yeah,
like light out, shut the door, I'm out. And it's very hard. Same thing with it's in relationships, regular, your everyday run of the mill friendships, relationships, whatever. It's like, yeah, no, I'm good.
but
I'm
it's
out.
healthier if you're a whole person who wants a relationship as opposed to a person who needs a relationship to be complete.
Yes, and it's that, and that goes to the persons that the two people I was talking about, like 3 people back, about not being able to function healthfully without a relationship. It was defining you instead of being like, you need to be on your own.
Yep.
And I find anecdotally that women have a harder time being able to sit with themselves than men do.
Yep. Oh yeah.
Women just have a really hard time. It's like, okay, I can be fine. I can do it on my own.
It's part of their gender identity.
It's the gender identity is like, I have to have a man in my life to be able, or I have to have, I don't want to be discriminatory. So whatever, they have to have a partner in their life, and women tend to have a harder time with that. Men want it, but they have different ways of doing that. And
women are less of women if they're not nurturing something or somebody.
Right. And it's not even like that's conscious. It's just
right.
a thing. I'm just thinking about an example of that one client I was just thinking about that's keeps going back to the same person over and over and over and over again, despite, because
you're either a nurturer or a crazy cat lady. There's nothing in between.
Thank you. Apparently I'm a crazy cat lady.
No.
Yeah. Thanks a lot, Lou. That
was
you're a
nurturer.
Shot. I am a nurturer.
Yeah.
And a crazy cat lady. My house is a little bit of a menagerie right now with all the, there's 7. There's 7.
Oh boy.
Well, 6 cats in a child.
6 cats in the small animal.
In the small thing.
Yeah.
Right? Right, you're the boy. All right. So hopefully that was helpful for everyone. And I didn't see any comments today. So I'm sure, did you see any comments today?
No, but sometimes they're just listening. Sometimes
I know.
it's good and they're listening.
I know. And I'm sure I'll hear from people later, and that's lovely. So hopefully that was helpful. And if you have more comments or questions, I can certainly keep going, but it's likely they'll switch next week. Oh, there's Paula. Oh, hi, Paula. Yes, we can be both. Yes, we can. So
you can be both. Yeah.
Yes, we
can.
No,
absolutely.
Yes, absolutely. So
the problem is when you don't realize you can be both.
Right. Well, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, all right. Well, thank you for all listening in. Hi, Paula. Bye, Paula. Thank you so much. And I will talk to you guys next week.